Welcome, everybody. Welcome. As always, you know that we are informal. Hello, Lisa. Glad to have you. We have a really special time together today, and we'll get to that. But I have been looking forward to this ever since our very generous guest decided to say yes to our request. I didn't mean to rhyme all that. It just happened. But thanks for joining us. Don't worry about if you're on video, you're off video, doesn't matter at all. We just ask that you kind of sit back, relax, use this time to kind of think about not only INDEEM 2022, but our specific topic today, state as model employer. I want to thank all of our collaborators from the Georgia Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled to our funders at GCDD, GBRA, our wonderful providers we're getting a chance to work with, Aspire, Easter Seals, the ARC of Southwest Georgia, which I just returned from a site visit this week. It was lovely in Albany. And our good friends at the State ADA Coordinator's Office. It looks like we have nearly the whole team on, I think. So welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the third webinar in the 4-webinar series for INDEEM 2022. Joseph has been curating all of the materials from proclamations to site visits and some photos and things like that. So hit the website at advancingemployment.com. I think Joseph has even put that kind of right there on the homepage. All right, well, let's get started. Joseph is going to pull up State as Model Employer, the one-pager that we disseminated during the candidates forum that GCDD hosted. So we're excited to hear some of the candidates mention and reference State as Model Employer. But for those of you who just need a little brushing up on it, as we'll hear from our guest, Rikki David, it's more complex than what you see here, but we know folks' attention spans aren't always wonderful. So we wanted to do the 3 whys, I guess 2 whys and a how. Why do it, what it is, and how to do it. And today we're really going to hear from Rikki about their experience, hopefully some tips, some things to avoid. So we're excited about this. And I guess I'll just spend a little time on maybe why doing this is important. You know, this is the epitome of a public-private partnership. We are, all of us, in some way or fashion, engaging employers. Sometimes that might be through a large conference, as Cheryl Ann and I participated in August. Some of that is job development for an individual person. Some of it is team-based employer engagement. But we're all required in some way to be reaching out to employers. And it seems odd to reach out to businesses when we're not doing the thing we're asking them to do. And State as Model Employer has been one of Advancing Employment's policy imperatives for nearly 3 years. And I can say that this feels like we're getting somewhere. And I think the stars aligned as we were doing our research and came upon Rikki in Louisiana. To that end, please take the PDF here of State as Model Employer. Please print it, send it, obviously to elected officials, but through our networks as well. The louder the voice, the better we can adopt this as a state. The other thing I think is real important to understand here is, remember, State as Model Employer is not just a good idea. Many states have adopted it. The National Council on State Legislatures, the National Governors Association have also recommended it. So it's a great step forward in terms of our state prioritizing employment first as the option for folks. Well, Rikki David is the State ADA Coordinator in Louisiana. And you can find Rikki all over the internet with the work that she has done, not only in the ADA state office, but also as her service in the state agencies and state government in Louisiana. She has both national and international credentials related to human resources, and that's a missing piece in this whole, not just state as model employer, but how we're engaging large businesses, right? And how we communicate the value, not only of state as model employer, but all those folks that you represent and support on a daily basis. So we're excited. We're going to kind of do this informally. I'm going to turn it over to Rikki here so she can kind of further introduce herself and enlighten us. And then we're going to open it up for questions. We're going to look at the executive order in Louisiana and then the legislation that was passed, all with an eye, folks, with the Carter Center event on October 27th. We've reserved the last hour of that day at the Carter Center. And by the way, if you haven't RSVP'd to Joseph, please do that. We're coming up on a tight timeline now for planning. But we'll use that hour, and so take notes. And that hour will be denoted to creating a blueprint, a pathway for us to advocate to keep state as model employer at the forefront of our policy imperatives. So as they say, with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rikki, and please help me welcome Rikki by either virtually clapping or really clapping. So unmute.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that so much. So as Doug mentioned, my name is Rikki David, and I appreciate everyone being here. I serve as the State Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator with the Louisiana Division of Administration. And my office was established in August of 2021. So I've served in this role for a little over a year. Prior to that, I had 20 years of human resources experience in Louisiana state government. Recently, that included serving as the HR director, ADA coordinator, and state as a model employer designee for the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources, which obviously provided me the perfect springboard into this new statewide role. But given my limited time as the state ADA coordinator, a lot of what I'll be discussing was actually coordinated and handled by the Governor's Office of Disability Affairs. So I want to be sure to give credit where credit's due for that work prior to my office's involvement. Nonetheless, I'm happy to be invited to join y'all and share what Louisiana's been doing in regard to state as a model employer. Do you want me to go ahead and get started on discussion of the executive order first, Doug?
Yeah, let's pull that up. I think that would really kind of help us. I think our state ADA coordinator's office, Cheryl Ann, Stacy Peace, Barbara, Stephen, I know they have some questions as well. But one of those from Cheryl Ann was just, how do you get to this point? We're going to look at the executive order and the legislation. I think we can all kind of figure out how it moves from executive order to legislation, but kind of the partnerships, the advocacy work behind the scenes, I think would really help us. So take it away.
Right. This executive order, I give credit where credit's due. This really originated with the Governor's Office of Disability Affairs. They have a wonderful executive director. Her name is Bambi Polizzola. And she herself has a child with disabilities and was a strong advocate in the disability community prior to the election of our current governor, Governor Edwards. And so she was placed into that role in the governor's office and really reached out and made wonderful connections in different groups and organizations, nonprofits, the government, state agencies, just really trying to bring everyone together and to focus on this. And so obviously working for the governor's office, she had an ear to the governor and could work with him to support this. But the biggest thing is identifying those stakeholders that already maybe have a personal connection to this, either themselves or with family, because they're going to be the strongest advocates for you that can really, move the needle on this. And so I would definitely recommend trying to identify those people in your government, in your agencies, because I think those are going to be the strongest proponents and the people that can really move this forward for you. Our executive order came out in March of 2018. It was really a result of a larger initiative called Employment First, which was working to help ensure all adults with disabilities of working age can find and sustain employment in competitive and fully integrated jobs. And so one of the things that
Did we lose Rikki?
Lost her audio.
Yeah, just hold on, guys. I think Rikki she may just need to sign back in. If you can hear us, Rikki, we've lost your audio. While we're waiting on Rikki to get back in, and Joseph, you handle whatever you got to there. I just want to bring everyone's attention to the executive order. It's very, I guess, much like a template of an executive order. But what strikes me is section 2, and I hope when Rikki joins us, we can hear from her. But
sorry about that.
No
sorry
problem.
about that.
No problem, Rikki. No worries. Please go on. Go on.
So I'm not sure where I cut out. I hope, which then launched us into the actual executive order, understanding that we needed to put together a model for businesses to, I think Doug spoke to this at the intro, we've got to start with us first. And so that was really, oh gosh. Well, let's see.
Rikki, you're just cutting in and out. I can hear you now, but
okay. I'll try to lean closer to the microphone if that helps.
Yeah, it's clear when you're on. It just it's kind of spotty. We lose you. If we lose you again, Joseph will send you just a telephone number to call in.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and no worries, my friend, not at all. Please keep going. And when you were offline, we were just talking about section 2, the actual forming of that task force. So if you can kind of speak to that, that'd be great. Okay, let's have Rikki call in. Joseph, if you can handle that, I'll keep reviewing the executive order. Thanks for being patient with us, guys. You know how technology is. So I was saying on section 2, just that it really mirrors what we have said that the Employment First Task Force should be doing here in Georgia. All of these policies, whether it's state as model employer, a state tax incentive, credentialing, making sure that we're matching all that we can in federal dollars, all of that needs to be coming out of a functioning Employment First task force and or council. So we all agree that we need to do that. But you can see section 2 as Louisiana's approach to that, right? In that it not only establishes the task force, but it mandates that there have to be policies and strategies and services designed inside of a 5-year plan. Now, we've argued in Georgia that we need a 10-year plan coming out of our Employment First work that would also include a state as model employer. Without that, without a plan, then we're never going to move that forward. So if as a state we decide, for all of us who care about these issues, that Employment First legislation and the council is not going to be revived, then we need to find another place to house these important pieces related to the task force. So, and Joseph, just holler at me when Rikki can call in.
Okay, I called in from my phone. Hopefully that will help with a better connection.
We can hear you, my friend. We can hear you. I was just talking about the 5-year plan, section 2 and all that. So I'll turn it back to you.
Sure. And overall, the 5-year plan was really about the task force coming up with ideas and strategies for the things that state agencies could do moving forward to advance employment of people with disabilities. But within that, each state agency was responsible for developing an annual plan and update it each year with certain goals and strategies for how they were going to increase employment of people with disabilities in their own agencies. The task force met on a regular basis to kind of work on ways to increase awareness and garner support for SAME in their own agencies. Overall, I think that the task force, some of the biggest tangible results that they came out with was they identified a need and they worked with the Department of State Civil Service to develop disability awareness and disability etiquette training that was made available to all state employees. So there was definitely a need for training to build awareness and also develop etiquette training to help people who maybe don't have disabilities or are not engaged in this initiative to better understand what's going on and work with those with disabilities. They also developed a data collection process for the voluntary self-identification of people with disabilities in their agencies. And so this was an annual survey monkey that was sent out by the governor's office to all state employees by email. And so those were some of the key things that kind of came out in the early years, was really kind of putting the structure in place under the executive order of developing these plans, putting these people and task force together to discuss what can we do, and if someone has a great idea, can we roll that out to more than just their own agency, but can we adopt it across state agencies, things of that nature. And then, of course, as I'm sure you can imagine, COVID hit, and one of those, all hands on deck, and everybody was dealing with COVID. And so honestly, some of the same initiative, that the momentum that had been built kind of got put on halt for a little while. But that was also about the same time that my office was created. And that was another initiative out of the governor's office. And the interest was to look at how do we continue and provide for the continuity of state as a model employer after the current governor's administration. He's a second-term governor, and he's got basically a year and 2 months left. And so we really wanted to work toward how do we ensure that what we've built will continue beyond that year and 2 months. So that's where we came to the legislation that we're now working to implement. The governor's office had reached out to me and asked, would I be willing, as the state ADA coordinator, to roll this state as a model employer under my umbrella and manage this going forward? And I willingly and happily agreed to that. And so I worked with one of our state representatives to draft and sponsor a bill to make that transition. So it moved the responsibility for state as a model employer from the governor's office to my office. It also did another transition related to the data collection process. So instead of an annual email survey, it now provides for a voluntary self-ID form to be provided to all state employees during their new hire onboarding. And that form was developed and mirrored after the federal government's required form for federal contractors under Section 503 of the Rehab Act. So in May of this year, the bill was passed and became Act 103 of the 2022 regular session. So I don't know if you want to pull up the act as well, and we can kind of go over that.
There we are. There
Okay.
it is. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you. The act has, it's much broader than just state as a model employer, but specifically for SAME, I think it does a couple of, really takes some huge steps forward for advancing employment of people with disabilities in state government for two reasons. One, as I've already mentioned, it codified SAME into state law. So it's no longer vulnerable to political influence or changes in the gubernatorial priorities. So that's really important. Second, it also expands the applicability of SAME from just those agencies that are under the governor to all of our executive branch state agencies. So for Louisiana, that's more than 135 agencies now.
Wow.
Yes. So we're talking cabinet agencies, higher education institutions, regulatory boards and commissions, you name it. If it's not in legislative or judicial branches, it's now subject to SAME. And so really that's where we're at. The first SAME plans under this new law are due to my office by December 1st. So we're really working hard on getting the first plans for a lot of these agencies that have never had to do this before, to get them to understand what the goals are, how this works, and get them on board with advancing this. So it's been quite a task and quite a journey so far, but it is definitely moving in the right direction here in Louisiana.
Rikki, it's Doug. To that point, I am shocked to hear the 130 plus agencies. That is fabulous. I think there's a common misnomer, right? That when we talk about state as model employer, we think we're talking about the state IDDD agency, mental health agency, VR agency, and certainly that's part of it. But if you can, for our attendees, can you explain a little more? Maybe give us a couple examples of some state agencies that don't have anything to do with disability, maybe not even human services,
Right.
that kind of fall under this. We'd love to hear some of that.
Yes. So even before, when it was just under the executive order, but certainly now, we're talking about all different kinds of state agencies. So we have the Department of Economic Development, Department of Revenue, the agency that I was at before this role, Department of Natural Resources, all of these agencies that have nothing to do with human services or disability groups or anything like that, have these plans in place. They are one of the things that a lot of the agencies across the board have adopted in their plans is identifying themselves as a state as a model employer agency for people with disabilities in their job announcements. So whenever they advertise a vacancy, there's a line in the vacancy announcement that says Department of Revenue is a state as a model employer for purposes of people with disabilities. And, we encourage applicants with disabilities to apply, so we're putting that message out there. And so it's not specific to just, agencies that have human services, but we're talking about across the breadth of state government. And so a lot of it is getting that messaging out there. And I think the more that we get that message out there across those agencies, we realize this really is state government. It's not specific to just our human services agencies.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to pause because I have several questions, but I don't want to be the host that hogs the mic. So, and we're hearing you just perfectly, my friend.
Good.
folks, if you want to ask questions of Rikki, either of the executive order or the legislation, put those in chat or feel free just to unmute and go for it. If you're more formal, you can raise your hand if you like. Let's give people a little time to formulate some questions. Sherilyn, I think you had some questions. Oh, here's Amy Price. Amy says, how can people find these jobs that you mentioned? And Amy, if we need more clarification for Rikki, you might want to unmute. How can people find the jobs you mentioned?
I'm happy to share a little more. As I support people to find job opportunities, it's so nice that people are making these jobs open to other people we support. But I found sometimes that they may be out there, but how do job seekers find it or know that their people are willing to have accommodations or support people and really truly, people don't know that those jobs exist. Is it really a job that is that also being supportive for people with disabilities? So I'm curious about how if it's also leading to more people with disabilities finding jobs.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And in Louisiana, our Department of State Civil Service requires us to advertise our vacancies in their online system. So we have a centralized advertising process for jobs. And so if anyone's interested in state government as a whole, whether they have a disability or not, that's where they're going to look to for jobs. But if people in the disability community don't know that or understand that, one of the things that we have done as part of the same goals, a lot of agencies that have adopted, is the Louisiana Rehab Services, our VOC Rehab agency. They have designated what they call a point of contact. And so as one of the goals in each agency's plans, they'll say, our goal is to contact the rehab services point of contact with each of our vacancy announcements. And then that point of contact then shares it directly with the clients that she's servicing, and helps them to apply if they qualify for that job. So, we're making it readily available to those VOC rehab counselors that are then working with individuals with disabilities to find jobs. So we're putting it on their radar so that they can then say, hey, I think I have an applicant. I have a client here that I've been working with. I think that qualifies and could apply. And then they work with them to facilitate that. Does that help?
I think it does. I think you got it, that. We have a few other ones here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you,
Great.
Amy. Rory from Rhode Island has asked, how has the state supported customizing jobs, changing job descriptions, hours worked, etc.? And to Rory's point, Rikki, I was trying to quickly peruse the actual legislation, but one of the things that really got me jazzed looking at the executive order was it did mention customized employment, supported employment. So is that language that Rory's referencing, did it make it into the legislation? Is that something that's an ongoing discussion? I'll turn it over to you to answer.
I think that's still an ongoing discussion. Unfortunately, I do think that's probably an area that we have not maximized yet in trying to customize jobs. To the extent that we're developing jobs specifically for an individual that has a disability and tailoring that to their abilities. Whereas we have made some, I would say, work schedule changes, things of that nature. Obviously, telework with COVID. I think that we're getting closer to that. I think we're finally getting management overall in state government to kind of understand the need to make adjustments to people's jobs, especially in this time of a pandemic and whatever, that we need to make those kind of adjustments if that's what's needed to help somebody get a job and or keep a job. And so we're definitely working in that direction. I can't say, we're customizing jobs, but we are certainly accommodating more than I think we ever have before.
Thank you, Rikki. And Cheryl Ann Frazier, the Assistant State ADA Coordinator in Georgia, has asked who was on the initial task force, kind of by position in government or otherwise. I think Cheryl Ann's trying to envision how we might pull those folks together even prior to an executive order legislation. Any insights on that?
Yeah, we generally, the way it was written, the executive order just required each agency to designate someone. So each of the department heads was able to decide. In most cases, it was your HR director or HR manager over recruiting. We did have a couple of agencies that designated like their diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator or their DEI director, but in most cases it was an HR professional from each of those agencies.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, here we go, Rory. Does Louisiana have a Medicaid buy-in that helps people work, earn more money, and not lose healthcare coverage? This is still a big issue for individuals and families. So I don't know if you know the answer to that, Rikki.
I was going to say, honestly, I don't know the answer to that one. I would have to look into that and get back to you.
Yes, thank you. Medicaid buy-in, Rory, as I said, is a friend and colleague from Rhode Island, and they have a pretty robust Medicaid buy-in that essentially, Rikki, just makes it easier, as Rory has pointed out, and makes the earnings threshold higher so people aren't
Gotcha.
losing that and losing some of it's a real barrier for folks.
Yes.
Okay, Darian Todd, do you want me to read this, Darian, or do you want to unmute?
You can read it. It doesn't matter.
Thank you, Darian.
You're welcome.
For the people that are creating these jobs for individuals with disabilities, how are they matching them with the right job coach that are fitting the job that the individual wants for themselves? So I guess that, Rikki, would kind of come into your relationship with the state VR agency. But tell us a little bit about that. Does the Louisiana VR provide the job coaches, or do they contract for that support with providers?
I think they do a combination of both. To my knowledge, they have on staff counselors, but obviously due to staffing shortages and the Great Resignation, they're having issues filling vacancies. I think they may have outsourced some of that, but by and large, they are trying to service them themselves, and they sit down and talk with the client with a disability to talk about what kind of job are they looking for, what kind of experience do they have previously, those things, to try to figure out where's the right fit for them. And that's really that key point of contact person that knows the clients through VR, but then is also getting those notices now from the HR representatives and the agencies, and can kind of be that bridge between the two to figure out, hey, is this the right person for this vacancy? Is this person a good fit for what we've got available?
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions? And again, you may unmute or put it in chat. So while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple more questions. Rikki, can you kind of tell us, for all of us really, what are the benefits, and you can make it specific to Louisiana, of doing the executive order first prior to the legislation? Like, was it initially, I mean, I hear your reasons, obviously, about making it codified into law. We get that, but could there be a process where you just skip the EEO and go straight to legislation?
Oh yeah, I definitely think you could. I think it's really going back to where are those stakeholders that you can identify in government that are really going to help you to be able to leverage this and push it forward. So, for us, having that executive director in the governor's office of disability affairs, she really was the strong voice to lead this and initiate it and get it off the ground. And she did what she could through the executive order. And then that's when we transitioned to, okay, let's see if we can get a legislator to buy into this, and then we can, convert it into a law. And so if you can, I already identify a legislator in Georgia that would help you and could be a strong advocate for it and carry the bill. I don't see any reason why you couldn't start there. It's really about who can you get to be that voice to help you carry the message and get it through.
This is so helpful. Let's keep them coming, guys. I'm going to keep going if you don't. So one of the things that, I just can't find much information on, Rikki, about any state's model employer initiatives, and maybe there isn't yet, but can we tell? I mean, if one of our premises is that we must demonstrate, right, that the state is putting its money where its mouth is, and then that leads to greater public-private partnerships. Can we tell if private employers have reacted to state as model employer? Are folks using that to open up more doors for employment outside of state agencies?
That's a really great question. I would hope so. I don't know if we have definitive data that would support that or not, but I do believe that it's probably more in the scheme of the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. You definitely know that those are crossing over not just in state government, but in private companies as well. You're seeing that in all employers. And we just have to make sure that that DEI message includes people with disabilities. And so that's, I think, the biggest disconnect in DEI efforts. And so just to make sure that that is continuing forward, that people with disabilities is included as one of your diversity goals. And then that leads into, obviously, the state as a model employer then, but I think that that's something that would be great to study and see if we are moving the needle, not just in state government, but in private industry as well.
Thank you, Rikki. We're excited about using it as a way to engage businesses across general workforce and employers, but to really kind of leverage that. And as you say, there's no better time than the Disability Awareness Month of 2022 is part of the equity equation, right? And
absolutely.
As I mentioned a little earlier, Cheryl Ann and I had the great fortune of meeting with large trade organizations back in August at the Atlanta Aquarium, Georgia Aquarium, and just lots of interest there. To that point, I'm curious, was there any discussion about, obviously, they're the function of the state ADA coordinator's office that you have, which I'm sure takes up lots of time. Was there any discussion of housing Louisiana's same at the state HR department? I'm just curious.
Well, and it's really a partnership. Obviously, I'm coordinating it from a standpoint of I'm collecting all of the agency's plans, and I'm helping them to come up with ideas to, how they can set goals, targeted goals on how to increase their representation in their workforce. But obviously, it's got to be a partnership with those HR professionals. And I'm fortunate that having come from HR in Louisiana state government, I know a lot of these people. Have had relationships with them for a long time. And so, they're very comfortable reaching out to me, working with me. And so I wouldn't say it's necessarily housed with them, but we're definitely in a joint venture together for it. It's not solely mine, it's not solely theirs.
I love that. I love it. It really does seem like you've married that pretty well. And I guess it, certainly from my experience with you, Rikki, you're such an open, generous person. But I think that if you came to state as model employer without that HR background, that might be seen as a detriment. But because you have those credentials and you've worked in the system in that way, I guess there's quite a bit of trust already established.
I do believe so. And certainly for me, it has helped so much because I really can relate and understand the challenges of being in an HR office in a state agency. And all that they're doing, that's separate and apart than state as a model employer. They've got payroll, they've got benefits, they've got a ton of things to manage. And so I understand those challenges. And so I think that gives me a unique perspective that, and I offer, opportunities and discussions with them about, hey, this is what I did when I was in your role, or these are the things, have you thought about this? And so those are some of the things, I always encourage the agencies to look at their unique, I guess the strategies or things that they already have available to them. Like when I was at the Department of Natural Resources, we had like electronic TV monitors on all of the elevator landings on each of the floors in our building. And so HR would put messages up there. It's an annual enrollment time, or, whatever it was. And I used that as a way to publicize Disability Awareness Month. And, I would put up messaging on a regular basis to kind of keep it front of mind for people, that it wasn't just a once a year thing. It wasn't a checkbox. We truly believed in it. We were behind it. And they saw that message continuously. So kind of using those things that they may already have available. Do they have a newsletter that they send out to their employees once a month or quarterly? Put it in there, like keep it in front of mind so that people don't forget this.
Wonderful. Cheryl Ann Frazier has a couple questions in chat. And what specific data do you collect from the participating agencies? And I guess she's adding here to measure the progress. Can you talk a little more about that?
Right. The data that we're collecting, again, we've kind of transitioned the data collection process itself. So we're trying to get a more reliable data collection, which quantitatively is the number or the percentage of employees with disabilities in each agency. And so previously it was a voluntary survey sent out by email. So, participation one year to the next could change if someone disclosed that they had a disability last year, but it was an anonymous survey and they didn't do it again this year. Well, then the percentage went down, but they were still employed with you. So we had to figure out a way to get better data. So that's why we came up with the new process of now the voluntary self-ID form is provided for all new hires at the time that they're hired, and then every 5 years thereafter, so that if someone acquires a disability while they're employed, they have the opportunity to disclose that as well. And so I think we're going to start getting some more reliable data. So we'll be collecting that percentage. We also look at the completion of those goals. So we try to make the goal setting in the plans very, smart. They got to be specific, quantifiable, tangible. And so we're looking for, did they complete the goal that they set for themselves, whether it's providing training, attending job fairs, related specifically for disability community, things of that nature. And then did they complete those tasks? So that's kind of the data that's collected. And of course, being the first year, I'll start, in subsequent years, start comparing, is our percentages going up? Did they report that they have 7%, people with disabilities in their organizations this year, and then next year they report 5.5? Well, then we need to do some work, So I'll start looking at that as the years go on.
Excellent. And just to, before I get to your Rebecca and your question, just to bring people's attention to the legislation, I think it's page 5. It both lists the training that's required, some of the measurements that Rikki was referencing, and I think real interesting, and I think some teeth here is on page 5 of the legislation, that the report should also include EEOC complaints, right? And
Right.
really
Well,
looking at those that are filed either as civil actions in state or federal court.
Yeah, and that report that you're talking about, that section of the legislation is not specific to state as a model employer, but it's annual ADA reporting as a whole. So they're reporting to me the number of accommodation requests that they're receiving, the number that they granted, the number that they denied, the number of people that completed the training, the required training. And then obviously, like Doug mentioned, that the number of EEOC complaints and court filings and things of that nature. And so that the hope is to kind of collect this data to get a better grasp on who really needs help. Obviously, if I get an annual report and they're saying they received 10 accommodation requests from their employees and they denied 8 of them, well, I need to work with them because they obviously don't understand what the ADA requires. And so they shouldn't be denying that high a percentage. So it kind of gives me a framework to figure out those agencies that may need more assistance from me educationally and with technical resources to help them better understand what their requirements are.
Thank you, Rikki. I was hoping you would illuminate us in that way. Thank you. Rebecca says, are there ways that you encourage disclosure for applicants and people who are already employed?
I think that's going to be a cultural thing that takes time for people to really trust in. And now that we've been doing it a couple years, we've had the survey, the anonymous surveys, and now rolling that into a new hire onboarding process. I know for the new form, I was intentional about if they check the box saying, yes, I have a disability, we made sure to include a little blurb on there saying, if you checked yes, please review our policy, our ADA policy, and be sure to request, any accommodations that may needed to help you, to kind of help them see, like, we're here to help you. We're not trying to use this against you. If anything, this disclosure is so that we can help you. And so I think the more we can put that kind of messaging out, the more people will trust and be willing to disclose if they have a disability.
Thank you, Rikki. I want to kind of, as we're getting into the end here, just want to mention when I reached out to Rikki, and again, not only was she generous to spend time with us in her busy schedule, but she also, which we should all be proud of, checked out Georgia's state ADA coordinator's office
Yes.
when she was put in this position, and was just so impressed with them, as we all are. So that's a nice kudos
Absolutely.
to our partners. Let's see. I think hold on here. Joseph's trying to get me to look at chat. Oh, Joseph has also put in the survey, so please do that for us. It helps us report. Let's see. Am I missing somebody? I guess not. I guess I haven't missed anybody. Sorry about that. One final question, Rikki, and I didn't prep you for this, so totally understand. But can you think of a pretty cool success story where certainly no names, don't even have to say the state agency, but where the state as model employer and focusing on this created an opportunity for someone?
I would say one of the agencies that I've been most impressed with for us is the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism. They oversee all of our state parks. And again, going back to the concept of identifying your stakeholders, we have a really strong executive who's like second in charge over there that has a son with a disability. And so she became a very strong advocate within the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism to support that program. And so they developed like internships and summer positions at all of the state parks, specifically for people with disabilities. And so, you know, being a state park, it was really great because they have a lot of part-time positions during the summer hours where they're already have a need to staff up. And so they were intentional about carving those out for people with disabilities. And it was just a great initiative, and they promote that every year now. And I think that's one of the best things that I've seen in our agencies.
Very cool. I love that. I love it. Well, we only have a few minutes here. Are there any other questions from participants that I haven't covered that you would like to ask? You may unmute or put it in chat.
Hi, this is Darian. I have one question. So, and you probably touched based on this, but I would like to know when the individual goes for the interview and, you know, happily gets the job, how can that individual, you know, go further into that job or get a promotion
Ah,
or you know, like I said, go further and um yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
great question, Darren. Yeah, yeah.
And I know within Louisiana state government, a lot of our positions are already set up to be in what's called a career progression group. And so a job starts out as, you know, a specialist one, and then with a year of experience, then you move up to a 2, and then another year of experience, you move up to a 3. And so we have some kind of built-in progression available for people with and without disabilities in our system, so that they're not just hired in as a clerical person and they go nowhere. You know, we don't want people to be in dead-end jobs. We want these to be meaningful jobs. And so our structure's kind of already set up to help ensure that. But I think once you get through that career progression, it's really about working with that person. If they have the rehab, having their counselor talk to them about things that they can do to ensure that they're promotable, you know, attendance, obviously, good attendance, performance, things of that nature, just kind of coaching them through that workplace. And so I think it's important to make sure that you have that career progression available within your jobs. And then using that Voc Rehab counselor to help them make sure that they acclimate to the workplace, and they can obviously do what's needed in that job.
Thank you, Darian. Thank you, Rikki. Yep, Star's giving you both credit for that. Darian and Rikki, thank you, thank you. All right, I want to thank you, Rikki, really, truly. I know I've said it a few
Absolutely.
times, but we owe you one. So
No, not at
you,
all.
yeah, we want to continue to collaborate and support one another. So we really do appreciate all of your insights, and anything we can do to help in any way, please let us know.
Well, I
Uh,
did
you-
tell you, I'm very interested in both the facility program and the ICT. So I don't know, Doug didn't get to mention, and I didn't say it before, but being my office built and created a year ago, I'm an office of one. And so I have a lot of ideas about things I want to do and ways I want to expand. And so I'm going to work toward that end, but when I'm ready, I'm going to reach out to you.
we would love that. We're always about learning and trying to help others and asking questions. That's what a great community of practice is. But
Absolutely.
one more time, thank you, Rikki, so much. We will be using this, you all, the executive order, the legislation, and the one pager on state as model employer at the Carter Center. Joseph will be bringing that and emailing them out. So thank you all. Next week, join us for our folks from Wisconsin, Tuesday at 2, where we will be looking at job coaching stipends paid to supervisors and coworkers in that project. All right, as always, I'm going to wave you out. Thank you all so much for joining, and we'll talk to you and see you soon.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Bye. I'll stay on and keep
Rikki.
waving you.
Thank you. Y'all have a
Yes.
good day.
Thank
You
you, Rikki. Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. See you, Denise. Glad you could join.